thank you for joining us for Under the Shadow of the Cross. Today I want to start with one of my most favorite Bible heroes or characters that we meet along the pathway from Holy Thursday through Easter Sunday, and his name is Peter. Peter is actually one of my favorite characters from the Bible. This is human character where we see so many ups and downs. We see that he has a little bit of a temper, but yet has some leadership qualities as well. So he was one of the first disciples to be chosen by Jesus, along with his brother Andrew and then James and John, of course, as well. He was a fisherman by trade, and that's where we meet him when Jesus comes and calls him to be a fisher of men. He lived on the seacoast of Capernaum. He was married, because we know that Jesus healed his mother-in-law. And he was just a wonderful character that we get to meet. In Matthew's gospel, in Mark's gospel, it said that when Jesus called him, he left everything immediately and followed after Jesus. Isn't that amazing? He left everything and followed after Jesus immediately. One of the things that we can get is we learn about his obedience, that after fishing all night and not catching a single thing, Jesus says, put out into deeper waters and throw your net out for a catch. And we see Peter say, we've been up all night, but Lord, at your word, I will do it. And they have a great catch. We also see then, right after that, his humility, in that knowing that he was wrong, that he should never have doubted. He says, Lord, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man. He's able to accept his sinfulness, his woundedness, and his weakness. And Jesus calls him, as I said before, to be a fisher of men. And it's in Matthew 16, where Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And it's at that point that Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter, which means rock, sizable rock, on which he's going to build his church. Gives him the keys and the authority to be our Holy Father, our first Pope, and to lead his brothers, the apostles, on earth when Jesus ascends into heaven. And that's where we meet him, there. Peter was at the mountain, Mount Tabor, with James and John, and saw the transfiguration of Jesus. And for our purposes today, we meet him on another mountain called the Mount of Olives, where he becomes and falls under the shadow of the cross. We meet him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus tells him to watch and to pray, to be vigilant, to stay awake and alert. Isn't that the message for you and for me? To watch and to pray, to stay vigilant, to remain awake, especially in the world in which we live today. Isn't that our call too? Next in the scene, we see Peter take matters into his own hands. He thinks he's going to solve the problem by taking out a sword and cutting off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant's ear. And Jesus says, no, this is not the way we're going to do this. Not through the sword. For those who live by the sword will also die by the sword. And then we see Peter flee like all the other disciples. If I'm not mistaken, we also saw that at the Last Supper, Peter said that he would die with Jesus rather than abandon him. But yet here, Jesus finds himself alone in the Garden of Gethsemane. All have left. The next scene we see is on Holy Thursday night in the courtyard of Caiaphas, the high priest. And it's interesting that the gospel said that we see Peter following at a distance. We heard how Peter followed closely to Jesus early on in his life, but now he's following at a distance. In fact, Peter's actually going through a trial of his own, a trial by association. 3 times while sitting around a charcoal fire, and that's a very important word those two words actually, charcoal fire. Sitting around a charcoal fire, we see Peter get questioned 3 times. Surely you were one of his disciples. You are one of his disciples. And we see Peter go through this, I don't know what you're talking about, to eventually, on the 3rd time, I do not know the man. And then we see how Jesus looks through the crowd, how Jesus must have looked at him with love. And Peter runs away and weeps bitterly. We don't meet Peter again until after the resurrection. One of my favorite scenes and one of my favorite Bible studies for John chapter 21. The men are fishing. Jesus is on the shore, yet they do not know that it's him. He asks if they've caught anything, and they say, no, not yet. He says, cast your net on the other side of the boat, and they do. And they bring in such a huge catch. Peter, in his humanness, after thinking about all that he's done, jumps into the water, for he says, it's the Lord. He swims back to shore to greet him. And then this most wonderful and amazing interaction. We have an interaction between Jesus and John 21, between Jesus and Peter. Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? 3 times. And Peter says 3 times, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And now Jesus is asking Peter if he loves him 3 times to undo what he has done. But finally, our final point for today is this, that we have to look at the Greek translation of this Bible passage to understand what was really happening. As you know, there are different words for love in Greek. The 2 words I want to focus on today is philios love, or the philia love, the love of brother, like a brotherly love that the disciples would have had for each other, and a love called agape love, a love that Jesus shows for you and me, a self-sacrificing love. When Jesus asked Peter the first time, Peter, do you love me? He's saying, Peter, do you agape me? And what I love about Peter is that in his humanness, he says, I just can't love you that way. I philios you. Like, this is all I got. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Jesus asks again, do you agape me, Peter? And he says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I philios you. You know, this is all I have. And then finally, the 3rd time, Jesus says, Peter, do you philios me? And Peter says, you know I philios you. You know all things. Tend my sheep. And so Jesus, who is God, meets us where we're at today. He's always asking us for agape, self-sacrificial love. However, we're not always able to give it. So Jesus meets Peter where he was at. Jesus meets us where we are at today. But he doesn't leave us there. He takes us on from there and takes us under the shadow of the cross. Stay tuned for another great episode of Under the Shadow of the Cross, an original St. Philip's Church series. Have a great day, and God bless you.